Hello, hello. Welcome, Sophia, and welcome everybody out there listening to the next webinar with Ever Wonder. We're wondering, we're thinking, we're doing. So this is webinar number 8. I'd like to welcome everybody to the power of color, where we'll explore how branding is not just what people see, it's what they feel. So this is a vibe, it's psychology, it's emotion. And feeling is everything because it's that dynamic nature of branding. And most importantly, I think branding is memory, which becomes strategy. So today we're going to take you through a whole bunch of examples where we tie color to perception, perception to brand, and how brands make an impact on our everyday lives. These have changed. We've seen such rapid growth in the past 100 years in branding that even in the last 5 years, what we're seeing now is this massive explosion of AI. And so color now is a little bit out the window because we're all following different social norms, and brands are trying to be disruptive because there's so much noise in the market. And when there's so much noise, you have to find a way to take your equalizer and find some sense in the noise. And so today, table of contents, we'll go through 5 key facets. The 5th one doesn't really count because it's question and answer. But first is introductions. I will give you the background of the prestigious designer on our team, Sophia Sifuentes. Number 2, we'll go through color psychology and its impact on branding. Again, psychology is behavior. It becomes memory, it becomes feel. Every impact that it has on brands that we live and breathe every day, super important. Number 3, color associations and the industry applications. There will be some industry applications that you think of immediately. And whether or not you are exposed to marketing, you're in finance, you're in brand, operations, it doesn't really matter your role. You're consumers and you buy things. You walk into a Target, you can see the big red bullseye. You walk into a Walmart, you understand, you see the blue. These colors will make some associations with you. And there's reasons, deep reasons, why industries continue to use these things. They're not just social norms, there's reasons why they connect, which Sophia will take you through as well. And then number 4, how to choose the right colors for your brand. If you're starting out, let's say you're a young brand, you don't have a formalized logo, colors, design system, we'll help you guide through that process. We also will give you some materials to do that. So we'll leave behind that you can download and choose what's right for your brand. Second to that, we'll help you understand when do you follow the pack or when do you separate from the herd? And last, of course, I mentioned this, but questions and answers, we do want all of your questions. That's where I believe the discussion gets really rich. And so who's here today? So first and foremost, Sophia, I said welcome. I say welcome again.
Thank you.
One of our designers at Ever Wonder, she is unbelievably talented. I had the personal honor of actually being in her house a few days ago and seeing all the different artwork on the walls that she has created. So she's an innovator, she's an inventor. Most importantly, she's an artist. She brings that artistry to Ever Wonder every single day. We appreciate the hustle, but even more so, she's a color specialist. And she reports into Mariana Lopez, who is a color specialist and professional herself. So we have a good team of colorists. We understand it. The reason why we're doing today's webinar is we find ourselves in meetings constantly where clients will push back on the subjectivity of color. They might have colors that they're averse to. And it's our job to help them understand that it's not ultimately what one personal individual feels. It's what's right for the market. It's what's right for their brand. And then myself as well, for those who have not been on any previous webinars, don't know who I am the owner and principal of Ever Wonder. I don't often like to say that because I think we all work together. However, 20 years in business directly, 7 in finance, the rest in marketing. There's not many things in branding I have not seen. So welcome back, really appreciate it. And Soph, take us away on our journey.
Of course. So before we do the deep dive, I wanted to highlight this quote that I found that I felt fully encompassed what we want attendees to walk away with. So it's a quote by the 1800s French painter, illustrator, and printmaker Pierre Bonnard. And it's color does not add a pleasant quality to design. It reinforces it. So what does that mean exactly? It means that when you're choosing a color, it's not based on personal preference, like a lot of people could think. It's a deep understanding in effective design. It's intentional, and every choice that you do for your brand should be purposeful, and color plays a huge role in that.
And tell me this too, Soph, when it comes to color, does not have a pleasant quality, it reinforces it. How important is reinforcing, right? Because when I think of like color, most people just pick what they like. So what is Pierre really saying when he says it reinforces it?
When he says it reinforces it, it's not there just for visual appeal. It's not there to make it look pretty. It's there to, and specifically with branding, it's there to help the brand position themselves in the market against competitors for finding their own identity and to help get them to their target audience.
So important.
So now we're going to dive into the quote unquote definition of what color psychology really is. So, going off of what we had previously discussed, it's not just about picking the pretty shade, and it's everything about choosing colors in a way that helps shape our moods and the way that we feel. So, if you've ever thought about what calm would look like, maybe we visualize an ocean or we envision lavender, right? Lavender fields. Well, those colors play a huge role in why we're even thinking of those associations in general. It's not random. So, they tap into our emotions and it helps the way we react to certain things. This can be shaped by things like age, culture, and personal experiences as well.
It's so interesting too, because there is an app on the marketplace called Calm. And when you mentioned lavender and certain shades of blue and how you should feel calm, when you open up the app, it's a meditation app. And they have, Tamara Levitt does daily meditations every day for 10 minutes. Then there's all ranges of different folks you get exposed to, sleep stories, etc. But when you go into Calm, there's these like small sounds in the background, but you see this general energy of purple and blue when it walks you in, and you feel relaxed. And you haven't even meditated yet. You might have never meditated in your life, but just the power of color. So I'd encourage everybody, try the free trial, because if you want to see color come to life in a great way, Calm does an awesome job. So why does it
Yeah.
matter?
That's a whole reason as well that it helps aid the experience for users, right? And we're just wanting to push the fact that, okay, so say we talk about color. Why should we do it? Why does it really matter? So let's get down to some numbers of how color affects our consumers. 93% of consumers make purchasing decisions based on visuals alone, right? A lot of people are visual learners, will take references to if we see red, maybe it's something that's energetic, maybe it's something that's passionate, just like how Brian had spoke on the Calm app, right? If it was yellow, we would have a different perception of how we would feel. Going into that as well, it's color can increase brand awareness and recognition by 80%. We live this in our day-to-day life and don't even realize. If I have a coffee cup that's green, I might think Starbucks. Or if I have a shoebox that's orange, I might think Nike. So those are just subtle references to that brand awareness that they're building for us solely based through color. And lastly, up to 90% of an initial brand impression comes from color itself.
What's cool about this too is you mentioned orange on the shoebox of Nike. They've always been bold, but if you think about shoeboxes, were all the same drab color of cardboard, and they came in and just dropped a disruption bomb and went full
Yeah,
orange.
exactly. Exactly.
And
To stand out.
and so color breakdowns, I do want to say so how important this is, and I know you recreated this color wheel too. Take us through, because the rainbow is all the light we see.
Yes. So if we look at the visual on the right, it does show the primary hues of the rainbow. And while some brands don't gravitate to that strong color, there is a range in between them and dark and lighter versions of them. So this visual gives us a good representation of how major brands are tapping into these hues of the rainbow. And just going again, reiterating the point that this will help with brand recognition. And in some of these, we see the color and we already know what brand it is without really looking into that logo. So we're going to break down the six most popular brand colors and why they're more than just a pretty shade. It's a strategy.
Yeah, and the so what to this as well is, think about the rainbow. Some people are aware of the acronym Roy G. Biv, which is red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, violet, where there's a blue in there as well. The only thing that's not here is the indigo color, but you have the full color spectrum. And if you actually zoom in and look at some of these brands, again, you're going to feel naturally and say, well, yeah, it's always been that way. Of course, I get it. However, what we're going to take you through is each of these colors and go into detail about why people made this choice. So what is the emotional connection, the psychological connection to these? And then in addition to it, what happens if they change? So when you look at this, you'll see Coca-Cola's color on here potentially. We'll talk about it later. But Pepsi actually changed the hue in their packaging. This was in 2011. Changed a slight different bit of blue inside the hue of the package to make sure that they can have an impact on shelf. Unfortunately, the impact wasn't positive. So their loyalists and individuals who drank Pepsi on an everyday basis noticed immediately and they went right to their keyboard. So they were blasting them on online forums and social. And Pepsi had to recover and they actually went back. So you'll often see brands make a decision, and it's not just the equity they have in a color, but it's also what people associate with. So as we see this breakdown here, I do like also, if you look at orange, we don't often think of orange brands, but there's a ton of companies that tie to it.
So going into our first color for the breakdown is blue. So I wanted to ask you, Bri, when you think of a hospital, nurses in scrubs, or even a medical building, what colors come to mind?
Yeah, I most often, when I think of blue, I think of my insurance payouts and I think about
Yeah,
insurance.
exactly.
But when it
Well,
comes to, yeah, when it comes to blue though, scrubs immediately build trust with me because I think of someone that's going to help me. And I think of not only trust, but I also think of like logic, dependability, security, safety. These are things that when they don't wear that, like if somebody wears an alternate color of scrubs, I'll tilt my head to the side and say,
yeah.
what's going on here? So yeah, I often think of that.
Yeah, and there's a reason behind it. So not only does it show those associations to trust and loyalty, it's the world's favorite color. 35% of women and 57% of men rank it as their top pick. And it's not only individuals that love the color, brands do too. 33% of logos feature this color. So it's the ultimate go-to when picking color for branding. However, you do want to tread lightly with the use of this color and the hues because it can come off as emotionless, unfriendly, even unappetizing sometimes. But we wanted to show a good example of a well-known brand that uses this color to its full potential, and that's Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. It uses this to signal trust and reliability because they're in health insurance. So they want those users, they want those people coming in, spending money, going through hardships in their life to feel that security.
And also I would challenge anybody to think about your last trip to the grocery store. How many food products did you see that were blue on shelf? You're only really going to think of one, and that's Pop Tarts. But Pop Tarts has a big blue box, and then they color the Pop Tart. So they allow the Pop Tart to be the hero. But think about it. You're not seeing blue on shelf when it's connected to food, and there's a big reason for it. It actually makes you feel unappetizing, or it's an appetite suppressant. But also with blue, I want to take this a little bit spiritual for a second. When you think of the sky's reflection off of oceans is blue. When you look up to the sky, we're actually working on another concept that how we all search for something up in the sky, but also the calming nature of rivers. And that brings in the dependability. So it's all really connected. And also one of our top chakras up here is the color blue. You just think about how all this is connected as one. It's not just the pixels that we can push.
Yeah, exactly. And going into our next color, purple, staying within these cool tones. Purple is a polarizing color. You either love it or you hate it.
Mm-hmm.
But some brands use it and they love it, and their customers do too. So for Hallmark, they took a bold step. They're in the TV channel industry. They took a bold step from stepping away from traditional industry colors and they went for purple to stand out. This worked for them because it was a link to femininity and that subtly targeted their predominantly female audience. So we do have some associations as well that are wisdom, wealth, imagination. But why do we have those? And some think it's to be linked back to the Roman Empire because only the highest ranking officials could afford Tyrian purple, and it was more rare than gold.
So interesting going back in time. Purple is one of those colors. It's people will have a visceral reaction to it. What I've also seen is purple sometimes pull into healthcare companies, alternate in like technology companies that feed into healthcare, because there is a level of wisdom connected to it as well. And that I think brings a level of safety also. It's also not too far from blue.
Yeah. So then going very opposite of those feelings, we're going to hit red. So red usually has signals of power, passion, maybe even a little bit of hunger sometimes. So that physiological effect is frequently used in food branding when fast food companies use red as their primary color. So one that we all know and love, Coca-Cola. their iconic red is the perfect example of brand recognition, and it helps support their motto, Real Magic. But Brian, talk me through when you see red and you're thinking not maybe on the most positive side, what are some feelings that come to mind when you see bright red in your face?
Or immediately hit the brakes and stop. If you see a red light or you see a stop sign, there's a color of action. That's the way that I describe it. The other thing is the top 20 insurance carriers, 9 of them use red in their primary color for branding. So when you think of red, it also can signal emergency, hazard, or to take action. And this is one of those things where if you use it, you got to get it right. Because if you're using red, you're going to command a tremendous amount of attention. You have to use it correctly, and you have to create a contrasting color palette. So the beautiful thing about Coca-Cola on a Coke can, you're going to see either the colors of gray or silver or white, and you have a stark contrast. Now, Coke's packaging stands off on shelf, but they're really smart in the way that they create their ads because they're only really using red when it's associated with the direct product and the parent company. So they use it sparingly. And it's the same thing with Farmers Insurance, State Farm, Travelers, et cetera. If you go to their websites, you'll notice there's a whole lot of white space and they're using a lot of contrast because if there's too much red, you're signaling danger. And the negative emotions connected to it, anger, danger, pain, warning, aggression. These are things in branding that Coca-Cola was able to spend all on the side of happiness versus the side of fear. And I mentioned that about insurance companies as well as you'll notice every single one that's using red contrasts with a stark black as well. And so there's this color of power and strength. And the reason why I like red too is as designers, we have so much options to then play with gradients and play with other colors that blend into red. So you can see red really giving a roadway for different rust colors or oranges or yellows blending into this. And so it just gives you a lot of range as a color. It's a powerful one. And back to this idea of balance, your root chakra, which is, if anybody knows energy centers in your body, that's like right at the base. That's where you hold on to safety.
Well, speaking of gradients and using different hues and exploring those different variations of color, orange is a great example of doing that as well. Because when we think of orange, we don't think of major brands that use orange, but maybe not in the way we think. So this super bright, super friendly, confident color is actually 29% of people's least favorite, but it hasn't stopped many brands from using it. It's playful, it's creative, it's confident. However, it can give vibes of immaturity, ignorance, and frustration. But why does it work, especially for Nickelodeon? They took the negative association and used it to their full advantage. So their edgy vibe with their quirky programming, this color was perfect to connect with their specific age group of young audiences. So not immaturity, but more creativity based. So it's good for brands to explore if these are some associations you want to have in your branding and messaging. But look at the alternative hues and gradients. See if there's an option in between besides the bright color if that's not what you're leaning towards.
Yeah, and we're HubSpot partners, and HubSpot just owns the color orange in the tech space for them, but they've also toned it back so it's a little bit more cantaloupe in nature than this bright in your face Nickelodeon. And I think HubSpot also does a really good job with complementary colors. So they have a number of pastel colors that complement their design system. But orange is one of those things where when you're going through a rebrand or you're going through just mapping your brand in the industry, one thing that we do, which is a really basic skill, but I think everybody should do it, is map your brand against the competitive set. Put 25 competitors, whether adjacent, tangential, whatever they are, put 25 competitors and see where you fit in, because your logo might be up on a sponsorship wall or it might be among the competitive set, or someone might search in Google and click images and just see the breakdown. So you really want to see how you flow in. And it's almost like, when you ask all your friends, what are they wearing for an event? Because you want to make sure that you're not way overdressed or way underdressed. Same thing with how your color fits in.
So for this next very popular brand, they have dominated this color palette for quite some time. So we're going into the color yellow. And when we think of yellow, there are certain symbols of happiness that come to mind. Brian, please enlighten us with some that
Well,
you have.
yeah, well, I think yellow for me is, it also brings a youthful exuberance, I think, to the market. A lot of the brands that also use yellow or shades of gold are in the construction industry as well. And you wouldn't think of those as necessarily happy per se, But I think McDonald's owns the Golden Arches because number one, they had super bright colored French fries that they connected as their logo. And who doesn't love McDonald's French fries? I vote top, in my opinion, best. But I think the other brands that might come into play, I will actually show this color wheel back here that we have. Because if you look at the left-hand side, DHL shipping company that offsets with red, you'll have Warner Brothers, huge production value in movies, the Los Angeles Lakers, an iconic brand, that yellow and purple, which was completely disruptive when a team came to be. The other side of a Subway logo, which connects to, again, food, happiness, putting a smile on your face. And then even the power of Ferrari. You know, Ferrari is an absolute luxury brand. If you have $500,000 laying around to buy a Ferrari, you're part of an exclusive club, but also Shell and gasoline. These are all things that, not just food, but it spans off this idea of opportunity. And it brings a smile to your face. Now, some of the negative emotions, fear, caution, anxiety, and cowardice, you think of a yellow light, which means like slow down, take care. I think in the power of branding, what we want to make sure is we focus more on the optimism, the happiness, and the warm side of yellow.
Yeah, exactly. And with all these colors, we're giving you the positive and negative. And while Nickelodeon was a semi-exception to try to use that negative as a positive, it's always good to lean towards the positive. And with the example of the color wheel, you see how yellow is extremely versatile, right? Not only in fast food that we do have an example here, but there's many brands that want to exude that optimism, that extroversion, that warmth. But something to note, because we haven't talked too much about color combinations, is that McDonald's does pair this yellow with red. So it's something that shows warmth, happiness, positivity, and red that has a effect of hunger. And they use it in their fast food branding, which is perfect for the Happy Meals that they do serve.
I'm happy. I still get happy when I see Happy Meal.
Me too.
I don't know how they afford all the toys, but whatever. And this is our last one, right? Green.
Yes, this is going to be our last one of the six that we're diving into today. So when we think of green, there are many associations to nature, right? The nature that's around us, green in foliage, green in grass. So it's no exception that this is going to be one of those associations here. However, there are some other connotations that are health, freshness, hope, even. So it's no surprise that it does represent life, but it is used predominantly in foods, in grocery stores, in health-focused branding. So just like Whole Foods here, they have their mission statement of nourish people and the planet. This color plays perfectly into that because we're speaking of the environment, we're speaking of nourishment for individuals. However, you want to tread lightly with the color green as well because it can have some associations with blandness, with boredom, and sometimes even envy.
Yeah. And we all like money, and most currency is green, at least in the US anyway. And I think you're going to find out, we're going to do an exercise with you guys. You're going to see how difficult it is to sort through color, because when we see common examples of green, it blends so much. So yes, it connects to grass and foliage, et cetera, and sometimes can mean wealth. The other side of it is you got to be careful to not blend in with what everyone else is doing. If you look at almost every single landscaping company, lawn service, lawn care, mosquito treatments, whatever that is, they're all using a form of green. And there's a reason for that, of course, because people expect it. If you're going to treat someone's lawn, you want your brand to at least show the fact that you can grow it and nourish it. But the danger is you look like everybody else. And so how industries use color, this is where we start to get into now the nuance of how you bring this into your company and organization. The industries that come to mind in the top right, we just mentioned how green is eco-friendly, health, outdoors, landscaping, et cetera. The middle with orange around fitness, logistics, and why logistics comes into play. FedEx actually changed their color. They weren't always orange and purple, but when they did change their color to orange and purple, it was a game changer for them. And so when you think of purple now in the lower right with luxury, tech, design, Soph mentioned how polarizing of a color it is, but FedEx kind of took this complementary balance with orange and purple, and they're spanning two different industries. So they're connecting the world, right? And then on the blue, finance, health, insurance, this is something we see. I mentioned the top 20 insurance carriers, 9 use the color red. Well, I believe the other 11 use blue in terms of the power of insurance. And so we'll talk through this, but before we go any further, I want to just walk you guys through Um, Small little exercise. What we've done is we've stripped the color. Now, one of these is a little bit of a cheat because you've already seen Blue Cross Blue Shield, but we did this intentional because we're pretty sure that you're going to forget what color it is
I
when
already forgot.
it's scanned. Yep. And then you'll see United Healthcare, Cigna, and Pfizer. Pfizer was massive during the pandemic. We all saw the logo several times on different commercials and different backgrounds connected to the vaccine. Will you remember the blue that's connected? So this is an exercise I like to do because it's a simple matching exercise. Now, when I hit the space bar and I go to the next slide, we're going to connect and show you which one they are, but we'll just give you 10 seconds. Take a look. See what you think.
Gravitate. Which color is gravitating towards which logo, guys? It's a tough one. I mean, some of them, like the second and fourth option, they're so similar.
And not to mention, like, I'll just tell you this, I'm supposed to be a brand expert. I got all these wrong. And I use United Healthcare, number one, and Pfizer was located right next to my apartment in Jersey, but it's another story. All right, so we'll match these up. In full color, Blue Shield, sorry, is a little bit muted back. Now, a hex value, by the way, is a hexadecimal code. It's a collection of numbers and letters. This is where you start to get into a space where now, with the evolution of the Adobe Suite and Figma, we have so much room to play, right? There is a tremendous amount of colors. So when we think of Pantone, PMS colors, and we think about hexadecimal codes, we have a whole range that we can play with. But Blue Cross Blue Shield and United Healthcare, when you actually match those up on LinkedIn and you're looking through ads, imagine if all four of these companies had LinkedIn ads, one to the next in subsequent order, you'd be lost in the shuffle. And that's why branding, materials, and quality of content really matter, because your primary blue, you'll sit in a room with an agency for hours and hours. You'll go through revisions and revisions and revisions. At the end of the day, the boldness of your creative and the consistency of message is what's going to separate you. Because Cigna, the brightest blue here on the top of the list, that 033FF, you look at that color and you're like, I wouldn't know that Cigna was that bright. But when you see it against competitors or adjacent companies, it does look quite different. But again, if you're scrolling through a feed, it's going to be a mess. And Pfizer as well. Pfizer, I would have thought was the third choice in there, and I would have been wrong. It's a much more like blueberry blue when you see it in isolation. So we'll do the next example. Everybody, I'm sure, stepped into a Whole Foods at sometimes. I call it whole paycheck because by the time you step out, you're poor because it is expensive, but it's worth it. And the color to Whole Foods to Sprouts is incredibly similar. So when you do the same exercise and you look to the right-hand side,
Yeah.
where would you guess Whole Foods was if you were to guess, so?
I mean, I only have one strong feeling that it's not the last one because those
Right.
top three, I mean, the differences are so minimal. They look very obvious when they're stacked next to each other, right? But once we show everybody the logos, it's it's important. This exercise is so important because you can really see how you're lining up with competitors that share the exact same primary hue, right? So you do have some, I think this is a good practice of that you do have some liberty in what kind of green you choose if you're going to green, just like these companies have done.
And what's wild too is the letter forms in Whole Foods and Sprouts are so
Mhm.
similar. You look at these
Yes.
things and you might say, well, like, why would they choose such a similar thing? Well, there's an association with it, and Whole
Hmm.
Foods is crushing it for decades. But if I match these up, the only one that I actually knew offhand was HelloFresh. And Instacart, that deep shade of green. Instacart has changed their brand a few times since they started, all in the green family. But when you look at Whole Foods as well, it's the third one down. My immediate gut instinct was Whole Foods was the first. So just reinforcing this concept that not only is color important, but if you're going to play in the herd, you have to be really thoughtful with how you separate from that herd.
Yes, exactly. And to the point of that last slide as well, when we saw those logos, if you could flip back a
Sure.
couple, me bride, two of them, please. If we went to those black and white logos, they're telling us a story. They're telling us a story with typography. They're telling us a story with what the text is actually telling us, right? But when you add that color in, if you could go to the next slide, please, it tells us a better story. It gives me fresh. It gives me organic. It gives me food, right? So that's exactly what we're talking about here, that it's very intentional. HelloFresh came with this very bright, vibrant color in comparison to Whole Foods, which might be a little bit more playful, but that's what their branding needs.
Every Corona needs a lime. So yeah.
Exactly. So Now we talked about brands that stayed within traditional industry colors, but what if you wanted to stand out? What would that look like? Where would you even start? So, a rule of thumb is if you wanted to stand out from that traditional industry color, you would find its complementary color. So, we're referencing the color wheel here, and a complementary color is the highest contrasting color to said color. So, say we're yellow. If our industry is predominantly yellow, if we stack our competitors against each other and we want to just completely stand out, then go across the color wheel and find purple. That means when you're lined up next to them, you will stand out completely. It's the opposite, it's its complement, just like how blue is with orange and red is with green. While we did talk about some color combinations that really make brands pop, like the Lakers, it's because they choose the complementary color. It's because they choose its opposite. So that's just a rule of thumb. But now we want to talk about some real world examples of brands that did it right and brands that missed the mark.
Love that. So this brand, not sure who's in the audience, not sure what exposure they might have to Liquid Death, but it's massive in the US right now. Now, Liquid Death, original proposition, the quote that came from one of their creative directors is, why let beer, energy drinks, and soda have all the fun? And I like the essence of this because from an anecdotal perspective, Liquid Death, again, if you don't know what this is, you might look at this and think that it is an energy drink or a beer. Very simply, it's water. Okay. They started off with still water and sparkling water, two different varieties, no flavors, no sugars, no sweeteners. And what they did is they took a really big pain point and said, the entire water market and hydration market is using clear bottles. And that was operating under the premise that people needed to know what was inside the bottle and needed to see that water was clear to be able to drink it. So there's a connection back to appetizing and trust. And Liquid Death said, well, that's kind of BS because I don't think people are buying water because they can see that it's clear. And if we put it in a can and we wrap it in an aluminum can, there's a much better recyclable material and it can be much more sustainable. But to push that even further, they said, if we're going to put water in a can and we're going to hide it and we're not going to do all the heavy lifting clear, we got to have a damn bold message and a really bright set of colors. What's interesting is their first two cans, one was white with a gold offset in terms of the holographic foil that you'll see in that melting skeleton. The other was a black can with white contrast and gold. And their tagline was murder your thirst. Their other strategy to do this, right, before we talk about color, their other strategy was, we're going to put this into hands of all the comedians that are doing podcasts out there because we want individuals that are open to creativity, that are open to push the bounds. And so there's very intentionality around all this, okay? But why color played a key role is they went on shelf and said, we're not going to do clear bottles. We're not going to grab a color green, blue, or purple like every other water company is doing. We're going to go in and hit people over the face with regal luxury. So one thing we talked about too is this color of yellow being welcoming. Well, turn up the dials, go from yellow to gold, and now gold brings in a richness to it. So they're able to get away with charging $1.99 for a can of water. And they put this whole notion of it's in the Alps, et cetera. But why this is working for them is because the gold is now their staple and they're going into all of their flavors. So they built a scalable design system where Liquid Death was, we're using white, we're using gold, we're using black. And now this says, once we launch a cola or a flavored lime sparkling seltzer, or I have the root beer Wrath in my fridge, which is a brown can. Now they're able to bring all this stuff out and their cohesive color is this gold and white.
Mhm.
Why this worked for them as well is because they were doing something super disruptive and color had to be disruptive in line as well.
Yeah, this is a great example. Sorry, Bri. This is a great example of a company that went outside its traditional colors, or maybe white, clear, blue, trying to signify that it's healthy. They didn't do any of that. They didn't promote that it was healthy. They barely promoted it was water, right? And they wanted it for their target audience that don't drink a lot of water, that drink soda, that drink the energy drinks. That way on the shelf, it was something interesting. It was something out of curiosity that played a huge role for them. So this is a great example of how their color was supported by strategy, brand messaging, and their intended audience.
It's wonderfully said. And on top of that is other people are trying to be as disruptive and trying to copy them now with like really bold messages. The problem is you can't put out really bold creative if the entire system doesn't talk to one another. And not every market is ripe for disruption. So if another water company came in to try to be super creative and disruptive, they wouldn't land like liquid death. So as marketers, we also have to understand that there's certain areas where you can play very, very disruptive and zig when everyone else is zagging. And there's others where you have to kind of ease your way into the market.
Yeah, exactly. So our next one, it might be a throwback for some, is a brand that maybe didn't get it right when in regards to color. So we're going to talk about the 2000s production of colored ketchup.
Oof.
So when we think of ketchup, we think red, we think tomato, right? Again, red, like we talked about before, it has an effect of making people hungry. So Heinz wanted to venture out a little bit and they started with green. And this was in line with their marketing efforts for the Shrek movie. It was successful. Again, color played a huge role, but also the messaging, the support with the film and Shrek being green. It was fine. It was good. Then they saw this and they wanted to grow. But the more they got into purple, teal, blue, the more it became unappetizing, the
Hmm.
more it became a question mark as to, is this actually ketchup? So again, their intended audience at the time were for kids, hence the easy squeeze bottle for children. And they thought color could play a role for them to venture out and try flavors like funky purple. However, they did miss the mark because maybe they ventured out a little bit too far from those those associations of what food color looks like and into colors that are a little bit more unappetizing for our psychological thinking.
And as we talked about, psychology is feeling, feeling is
Yeah.
memory. Memory is ultimately the brand impression you have. But I would hope they did a focus group. I would hope that Heinz sat down with some people and were like, guys, what do you think about purple ketchup? I don't think they did though, but the market told them very quickly that it's a bad idea.
Yes, it was shortly discontinued.
Yeah. So tell us about the formula because now that we're here, we've come full circle. I think we've showed people a lot in the span of colors, but I think now we have this is the most important of how we connect it back to the business.
Yeah, of course. So we went through today, we went through what is color psychology. We went through brands that are doing it up with the traditional colors and brands that are equally, if not more successful with breaking the mold of traditional colors. But what does that look like for your business? The first thing in our formula is choosing your industry. So referring back to those major colors per industry, that's going to tell you what your competitors are doing, what colors, what gradients, what hues are associated commonly with your industry and what you provide. And then once you choose that industry, probably the most important question to ask yourself is, do I follow the norm or do I break the mold? So we talked about brands that did both, some that were successful, some that weren't, right? But the biggest point that we need to hit on is if you're following the norm or breaking the mold, following industry norms is going to be easier. It's going to be easier because it's going to align your brand with the established expectations of that industry, right? You're going to blend in, which is not always a bad thing. However, if you break the mold, it is going to be a little bit more challenging because that color choice, it has to be extremely intentional and it has to support everything that your brand is, the brand messaging, the target audience you're going for, like we talked about with Liquid Death. So, for example, right, say you're in healthcare and you want to go for the color green instead of the traditional blue. That's fine. You want to have feelings of freshness, of nature, of hope, of prosperity. Of course, it can align, but it's only going to align if that messaging emphasizes those themes like growth and hope and reinforces that emotional connection. Because if you're just green to be green and you have the same messaging as these other companies within your industry that are blue, then it's going to miss the mark. So it's a full circle moment with choosing that other color. And then the last thing that once you've made that decision, then you go in, then you see those emotional associations with color and you choose it, right? So if I'm following the norm and I'm in medical sales. I'm going to go blue. It's for trust, it's for logic. Easy. Choosing the supporting color, done. But if we're breaking the mold and I want to be warm, I want to be hopeful, I want to be happy, maybe we lean towards yellow, but then that restructures your brand.
Yeah. And now with this proliferation of tech, and I mentioned AI before, as our industries are changing, you're going to have a lot of technology solutions where everybody has a new idea in tech. There are a ton of colors, right? And how those colors signify and connect to the brand and the message that you want. Exactly like Sophia's saying, whether you decide to follow the norm, be disruptive, leave the herd, join the herd, whatever that is, you have to set aside the budget to actually build out your brand and then stick to it. Consistency is key wherever you go. And what you're seeing now, again, is a company like Gamma, which is an AI company. They do really intelligent solutions where you could prompt it, translate to websites, translate to presentations. They've already rebranded 3 times since they've launched. They're less than 2 years old. Now, why they've rebranded so much is because they're watching and they're seeing how people are interacting with their brand. And also, as their brand becomes more malleable and does more things, they realize they're competing against different folks. Now, I would never encourage somebody to rebrand 3 times in 2 years, but they're trying to find their niche and they're just playing through it.
Mm-hmm.
Not every brand can afford to do that. And so the one thing to walk away with your agency partner or anybody you hire, when you're doing a logo, always do it in full black and white first, void of color. Because if you're getting your first concepts in your logo with color, you're not going to appreciate exactly as Soph talked about before with Sprouts, Whole Foods, HelloFresh, in the sense that the logo is communicating so much. So strip away the subjectivity, start with black and white, land on a concept, then allow color to flourish and build upon that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
so, go ahead.
Well, to your point, color is not the design itself, but it's going to reinforce the message. So if you have a logo and you feel like it's telling us what you do or it's telling us what your brand is, and the biggest thing is understanding your brand completely before you choose that color, because then it's going to aid in that supporting those emotions, those associations, but it can't be the thing that's holding the logo together. It's just a reinforcer. And speaking of this, we went through a lot. We went through a lot in these 45 minutes. We spoke about a lot of examples. I already forgot some of the associations with the color orange, right? It's a lot of information we're throwing at you. However, after the webinar, all of the attendees will get this color cheat sheet that we've created, and it does have bonus colors. So we're going to dive into black, we're going to dive into white, we're going to dive into brown, even pink, and you're going to get a better range of understanding what are your options and those associations to other colors and what industries are doing that as well. So you're not only going to walk away with the information we presented here today, you're going to get some additional.
Bonuses.
Yes.
Bonuses. And the cheat
Everyone
sheet's
likes a
also
bonus.
really, yeah, the cheat sheet's really great too, because it takes you through the formula. Choose your industry, follow the norm, and then go ahead and choose your supporting colors. We got a few minutes left. We'll take some questions and answers. Questions I think are really important because, as Soph said, we've covered so much of Expanse ground. Like we're in the open Great Plains today. So any questions that come to mind, whether that's where do you start? How do you sculpt? What do you do when your brand is already locked in? Like fire away on questions. And by the way, because we are sharing this, I do want to give a special shout out to Norma, because I know Norma's going to watch this and she's going to enjoy it. And she also is a colorist herself. She appreciates color in her life.
Oh, of course.
I want to give a shout out to Norma. And okay, Q&A. Let's see. Is there any of this? Zoom always moves where Q&A goes. Stand by, folks. Okay, no questions yet. We'll give people a minute or two. And then the other thing I wanted to say is after this, we will follow up with all attendees. We do record these. We'll take the recording. We'll get several clips to make sure that we have some nice snackable sound bites. In addition to that, once we send the recording, you get the full access if you want, along with this kind of cheat sheet as well.
Yes.
So question came in: to reinforce the power of color, I've seen brands using different colors for content and target audience. In Europe, food products tend to be greener due to a sustainability approach, whereas in South America, they use yellow or red, which is more energetic and connects to a younger audience. For instance, Nestle and McDonald's. Interesting. I like it. Okay, so that's building on this. So less of a question, more of an answer. So we'll see throughout the world different applications, very similar to how you localize language or localize message or you can be a bit more bold in your creative. Brands are also doing that to tie into the market dynamics. So we talked about, I appreciate that around sustainability as well. Green is definitely connected to environment. We work with a client in Ireland called Eco-Verify, and they do certifications based on how ready you are to be sustainable. And of course, they're using the color green. Question: how much should audience demographics like age or culture influence color choices? That's a phenomenal question. So if you want to take a stab or you want me to jump in?
Yeah. I think when you're developing your brand, and again, the best thing to do before this formula is have a deep understanding of what your brand looks like, what you want it to look like, who you want to sell to, who do you want to help. And if you have that in line, you have half the battle done. But you have to be aware your audience, you want to tailor it to your audience because those are the people you would ultimately want to be selling to. So it should heavily influence your color choices, just like Liquid Death. When they slapped black on a water bottle can, they were not thinking of the regular water bottle drinkers. They were not thinking of people that are focused on their health. They specifically targeted people that drink Monster, that drink Red Bull, right? That they're used to having that as their beverage. And it's a risk, it's a leap. However, it paid off in sales because those are the people that are buying it.
Yeah, and the other thing to say is certain demographics and psychographics will influence, but now we're in an era where baby boomers are the largest audience on Meta and Facebook. And so they're being exposed to like front-facing technology, leading edge innovative technology, and they're all shopping on Amazon. I mean, my immediate family, my father, who is a really, he embraces technology as well, goes on Amazon. That's where he orders everything from. So what he's being exposed to from a color perspective, I think it's less about age, but it's definitely more about culture. And I think it's also about how you're trying to exude, whether it's wealth or whether it's accessibility or whether it's value. Colors will tie to that. And the brightness of the colors you use versus the dimness will also impact that.
Yes.
And so next question. So how do you balance personal preference with brand strategy when selecting a palette? This is something I run into every single presentation that we have. Personal preference comes into play. Identifying where that personal preference comes from. There might be a moment in time where someone got exposed to a color and they were in front of their classroom at 8 years old, and that color has forever stuck with them as a negative experience. Being able to kind of reverse engineer where people come from and what associations they make is the right start. But the second is you have to respect the fact that if a client is hiring you, it's their brand, they're going to have a say in it. If they have an emotional connection to a color and they want to use a certain color, it's about you helping them find the right solution, the right exploration to do that. So choosing a certain palette, some people are very averse to pastel colors, but they might be very, very much right for the brand. But if they're starting a cafe or they're starting a small retail shop, walking them through and understanding their associations and then what's in the market. Because if they're in a downtown wealthy area and all the other stores have this really minimal design, you can't come in with a really loud, bright color palette because it's just going to be disruptive, not in a good way. And so I think balancing it is speaking to the idea of knowing that every room is a committee. And also, I've read this weekend, and I'll say this again, like I encourage anybody to go to a certain city and try to find a statue of a committee, right? You have to make your bets on one thing. So design can't be by committee. It has to be by fact. It has to be by data. And so removing the personal connection is a big one. So did you have anything to add on that one?
Um, I think you covered it. The short answer for me would be the less personal preference, the faster and the stronger we can get to that true color for your brand. However, if there is that personal attachment or that personal dislike, let's work around it. Let's look at those hues. Let's look at those gradients. If that color is what we feel is best for that messaging and for that audience.
Yeah. And this is where live imagery, this is also where image treatment can come into play, various design motifs. So getting that primary color is all about being, kind of finding your way to separate yourself. So next question, how complete color rebranding can change customer perception? Is it like Pepsi, or are there good positive cases when color rebranding makes more sales? Yeah, there are a lot of, positive examples. One positive example that came on the back of a full rebrand is when Salesforce updated their color palette to move into that sky blue color. When Salesforce moved into like more traditional technology and high-end enterprise design, they moved into this really light blue complemented with gray and black and lots of white space. Salesforce saw a huge benefit to that. What it also allowed Salesforce to do is bring in all of their acquisitions and start to unify those color palettes in a more flexible palette. So that was a big one. And then I think I could give you tons of examples. I would share some after the fact. And then next question is, how many colors should a brand palette include? Is there a rule of thumb? I mean, Soph, do you have a thought on that? I have a thought, but I'll give that.
Yeah, I definitely have like some thoughts on that, but also speaking to that previous point, just to hit on how a rebrand could change customer perception. I think a huge one that comes to mind with me is Apple had that gradient rainbow and they went completely monochromatic. And that was a positive rebrand for customer perception because it made them more premium, made them more luxurious, made them more futuristic. So I just wanted to include that example for that question, but hitting on this question, my typical rule of thumb is keeping that logo within 1 to 2 colors. You don't want it to be too full of multiple colors. You can always have supporting colors within like your imagery, within your website, within your flyer design, right? But that logo should be able to stand alone, black and white, like we said. And then it also should have a one color variation because you don't know where it's going to live, right? If you want to get shirts printed and they say you have one color, you always want to have your one color variation like Whole Foods. Or you can play with 1 to 3, like Sprouts does a good job of having a gradient as well. But it does make it a little bit more complicated if you're doing any distribution, if you're doing anything that requires print.
Yeah. And I mean, how many we typically include? Definitely have a primary color. You include a
Yes.
secondary color, and then
Mhm.
at least 3 tertiary colors. And so at a minimum, Soph was speaking a lot to logo, but when you think about the whole design system, you also want to include a percentage weighting scale to say how often are you using primary, secondary, or various tertiary colors? Because when you set a percentage to that, it allows you to set guidelines. So you don't
Yeah.
end up with a brand that's all over the place and feels rainbow, even though you only have 5 basic colors. So next thought from Ariana, amazing job. Appreciate that. And then have you noticed any macro trends in terms of how brands are positioning themselves as far as color? Do you have any predictions? Just curious. I like that. So what do you think? You could jump in first.
I think this is a conversation we've both shared and we both can definitely put into this question is the Jaguar rebrand. They went colorful, they went futuristic. A lot of brands I feel like are playing into this AI, into tech, even if they are not tech focused, to kind of appeal to this ever-changing landscape, right? Where AI is slowly being integrated into all forms of business. And I think Jaguar is a great example of that. Now, do I think it was successful? Personally, maybe not. I think it did remove some of those core values of luxury and like selection, being selective with their customer base. But I think that that's a great example of and maybe macro trends going forward, it's just going to continuously develop into a more tech-focused vibe.
And building on macro trends, it's funny because I thought gradients and drop shadows were a thing of the past, 15, 16 years ago, but they've been back in full force the past 5 years. There's certain things like flat design is a big one because flat design, you want to make sure that you're designing for multiple different devices at all different sizes. I think the other thing to think about is the biggest macro trend that I see is how do you find a way to not fall in trap of AI? Because Gen AI now can create logos, it can create brand elements that, not to say that it's good, but it happens very quickly. And so I think being able to create design that is not only fluid and open to animation and motion, because now it's a lot more accessible for us to create motion. The other thing is with flat design is you want to make sure your brand can scale no matter how big or no matter how small is in motion. And in terms of color, this is an interesting question because I don't necessarily know that I see a trend in color because every day I'm surprised by brands that launch and market or that go public or get another round of funding. And they're using colors that are quite disruptive to the industry norms. I haven't really seen as many patterns in the last year or two, but I would say more macro trends around design rather than color personally.
Yeah.
And we have time for one more question. Sorry, thanks for everybody that's hanging in. But what tools or resources do you recommend for testing color combinations before committing? It's a phenomenal question. I would say the cheat sheet for one, so we can get a little self-praise. But the other thing is being able to create that list of 20 to 25 brands in your market. So whether you're using a lawn care service and you're trying to market landscaping and lawn care services. Try to find all the local and national brands that you can. Very simple Google search and just plot those next to each other on a grid. We tend to do it in like a really nice, fancy presentation, but you can do it organically and just make sure you size all the logos so they're proportionate. That's one big resource that I like. In terms of tools, so do you have any that you would point to?
Yeah, I have one that I do use religiously when I'm just when designing, and creating color palettes. So it's called Coolors. So it's like Coolors. So that platform is like a rapid palette generator. And what you can do is you can space bar through different colors, lock the colors you like, and then it'll continuously give you different options based on if you would like some that are more complementary, some that are sticking to cooler, warm tones, or if you would like a more subdued or like bright palette. I think that's a great way to see because sometimes we don't think of all the colors that could pair well unless we see it on screen. So I think that's a really great way having that generator because then you could say, oh, this blue actually does surprisingly pair well with this yellow, right? Definitely I would recommend that one. That's my favorite.
And this might be a really basic one, but Pinterest, be a Pinterest king or queen.
Yes, me
And again,
too.
map out your own mood boards, map out your own images, because even just pairing families of colors together will give you a good sense of how this stuff might look once you apply your brand to it. So if you think about furniture stores, you think about retail, fashion, beauty, building your own sense of mood board to see how these things connect. And spell that again to me. You said it was Coolor.
Yes, it's like it's colors, but instead of color, it's cool. So
Okay,
cool.
got it.
Yes, really, really cool generator. You gotta check it out.
Love it. All right. So thank you so much for being you. Thank you so much for the time. And thanks to everybody out in the world that attended. So we'll get this out. We'll share this. Thanks for the Q&A. Always appreciate the discussion. And see you soon. Bye.
Hey guys.